and welcome to Denver and the 182nd Acoustical Society of America annual meeting. I'm your host, Larry Frum. I'm a senior press officer for the American Institute of Physics, and this is the second of our press conferences for today. We're going to be talking about, actually, if you missed the first one, you missed some really good stuff, but don't worry, we'll have recordings available later in the week and you'll be able to get those. So racetrack and auto races are really fun to attend. I know I've been to a couple myself, and you can actually feel the vibrations as the cars go by, and the noise is amazing to listen to, but I don't have to live near it. It could be unpleasant. Our first presenter for this session will be Bonnie Schnitta from SoundSense, who examines several different types of barriers to block that noise from reaching the surrounding areas of houses and businesses. Bonnie?
So hello, my talk is of course about raceways, but I do want to be very clear that whereas there is a great deal of math that goes into the solution set, in this scenario, because there are some very good programs that are available to do the mathematics, we're going to focus on another dynamic associated with the possible outcomes and a positive solution set. And I know I will talk a little bit about the importance of mathematics and how we get to the right answers, because my background is in signal processing and I did do some work for DARPA, and then before I started my company I solidified a lot of those computer programs to get me to where I am today and this talk. So I do want to start out by saying, when I'm communicating to people as well as to the community, it is very important that I get them to understand the real goals. So a lot of times they do not understand what a decibel is. On the other hand, that's okay. It's just noise to them, or it's just sound. But on the other hand, the important piece to it is understanding, if I'm going to solve a noise problem, how am I going to solve it? Most people know about earthquakes and the Richter scale. So a decibel is the same type of function. It is not a linear function, it is a logarithmic function. So when I'm telling them, okay, this is how much the noise is, and I am going to bring it down to so it's barely perceivable. Outdoor noise, you can rarely eliminate it unless you're putting someone inside and closing a window. But it could be barely perceivable. That's the 0 to 3 dB, and I explain that to them in a relationship relative to an earthquake. How often do you hear about a 0? Never, because it doesn't exist. A 1 or a 2 earthquake, rarely. So that helps them to understand what barely perceivable is and what goals I'm trying to set. So another piece in terms of being successful is understanding the noise source. And a lot of people go, yeah, it's a raceway or a racetrack and it's noisy. So it's more than that, because every sound has a signature. There are lower frequencies and there are higher frequencies, but it has a very specific signature. So when I go to do a solution, whether it's for a racetrack, which is typically oval in shape, or a raceway, which is more difficult because usually you get the curve, a lot of curves, and we'll show a picture of it in a minute, and you have the ups and downs, there's more acceleration. So consequently, I want to know how this acceleration is sending me the signal signature. So in this case, I'm showing the car as well as the motorcycle. So the case study that I'm going to talk about not only has that, but raceway, go-karts, and a few other things all make wonderful noises. But of course, the motorcycle is typically the one that makes the most noise. So in this case study, it's nice because it's two parts. I talk about the first phase where I solve problems and then why there were some problems that popped up later on. And you will notice the shape of the raceway. So for just a moment, when we are looking in this area right here, phase one did not include this piece right here. It was the track as you see it for everything but this. And what happened at the time was that when this raceway was being petitioned to be built, the community itself was saying, no, this is going to make too much noise, in which case I was hired to solve the problem. Now what's beautiful is that down here, south of this raceway, was a farmland. The farmer did not care. In fact, he couldn't hear anything over the sound of his tractor, so it never became a problem. This area was owned by the owner of the raceway, so that was not a problem. And it was really right over here. There were 2 churches, a post office, and right in this area up here, there was a residence. Well, several. So consequently, that was my focus. And could you be able to see it better? It does say SoundSense Sound Berm. And if it's this 7 shape, it's right inside there. So now the next piece is understanding how the sound is traveling and knowing what the type of radiation it is, meaning is it spherical, is it hemispherical, or is it cylindrical? What does that mean? Well, to break it down into something very simple, it means it's either a point source, a single sound coming at you, or is it a series of noises? So I have found mathematically from when I was down in the trenches and actually developing the programs myself, that if I was taking a reading of the noise source, which I always do, so I know the exact signature, and then I consider it as only a point source, and I take a reading of that single entity, it means I now know not only how the linear aspect of it was in the sense of sound travel, but the nonlinear and the anomalies. Anomalies can be wind, it can be the type of terrain, so it gets very complicated. But if I can figure that out for a point source, it means I can easily move on to a line source. Now, this is very important in the sense that a lot of times people say, oh, I have this noise problem, can you just tell me where to plant the trees and it's going to solve the problem? What's interesting is usually the noises that are disturbing are the lower frequencies. And if you look at this chart, you need, if you did have 100 feet thick foliage, this area here, remember, 1 or 2 dB is barely perceivable, 1, 2, or 3 dB is barely perceivable. Notice in these lower frequencies, any change you're going to get is barely perceivable. So if you go and plant 100 feet of dense foliage, it's going to cost you a lot of money and you're not going to get anywhere. So what are the real solutions? And just so you know, I usually tell people you need a 200 feet dense, thick foliage to equal 1 barrier. Right away they go, okay, tell me about the barriers. So there's natural barriers, there's partial barriers, and then there's window treatment. So here is a picture of what I consider partial enclosures. They're not really enclosures. It's you're going, well, I don't know, that's a wall. Yes, it is, but it is partial. You're not enclosing the sound completely. And then this is a natural berm. So we went with berm for the first case scenario because as they were building the raceway, they realized that they could build up this dirt in an area and that would help solve the problem. It was important, and it remains important, and I will talk more about it later, that not only do I specify the height, but it needs to be continuous, and I also specify where the peak needs to be. Now, first phase. It might be hard to see, but there is a line going right here, and this is kind of the before and after, and the reason why is because I'm focusing on what happened with the SoundSense berm in this area right here where these are some residents, here's the post office, and then right directly up here is a church. So the whole plan was don't disturb the church, obviously don't disturb the residences. So interestingly enough, the kids in the neighborhood really like to get their dirt bikes and be in this area, so we just had to be less than the dirt bikes on the weekends, which was really quite easy, and then to make this a comfortable area. So because of the berm itself, you'll see that prior to it, approaching in the residential area based on this color, it was noisy. Let's just put it that way. I'm talking to you around 65 dB. It was louder than that. It was 75 dB or so. That's doubling of the noise. So remember, it's logarithmic, not linear. And then now you see after the berm in this same area right here, it is down at the area where it literally is background, because even though this is a rural area and you would think it would be very quiet, there was farmland, and the sound of the cows in the area, the sound a lot like the cars going around. So the cows really liked the sound. They thought some friend was nearby. They just couldn't see where they were. So it was very successful. Then I get a call 20 years later. Bonnie, we have a real problem. And actually, I do want to go back for just a moment. This berm itself was actually written up in Road and Track, in that it talked about the safety factor. Because remember, if you have fast-moving cars and they go off the track and it hits a wall, not good. If it's a berm and it's properly sloped, then it actually eases and they can either go back into the raceway area or they can go up on the berm. Here's the beauty. I get the call from the raceway owner some Saturday going, you know, Bonnie, this berm is like great. Thank you, SoundSense. I go, oh, thank you. But the reason for the call is he goes, well, I decided to race today and all of a sudden the wheel came off on my car. So I just went up the berm and I'm sitting here with my tire in my car and I'm watching the race. So it worked in many ways, including the safety factor. Okay, now phase 2, what happened? This little area right here, the son-in-law of the raceway owner said, you know, it would be great if we had this extra little loop right here, and then when I don't know if you know anything about cars that do drifting, so instead of hugging the corner when they're going around a curve, they actually drift into it, catch a spot, and go. It's really beautiful. And so he was saying, this is fantastic for not only motorcycles, but for drifting, so let's do it. That was the exciting news. The bad news was that it was an area where you're going down a slope and now you're coming up. And oh, you know what? There's a church over here. Very religious community. There's churches everywhere. So now the cars are like going up, exhaust coming out the back. Where is it going to? Right at the church. So there were some problems. And of course, the people up in this area up here who before didn't hear any sounds, and the church up in this area didn't hear any sounds at all. Now we're hearing sounds. So what could have happened? So as it turned out, I said there was the extension. There also was the factor that, and I always advise my clients in advance, it's a natural berm. Just like natural fabrics, they twist, they turn, and the berms come down. So the berm just had to be raised up again. That was easy. Here's the tough part. What are we going to do with the church? So because, yes, it is a rural area, and before the cows get mooing and on the country roads the trucks are zooming by, it is very quiet. But notice this little bump here in the higher frequencies, and that's just in the distance. There's constantly people traveling on these country roads. This is the sound that you get at the church itself, and that is once the day gets going, because everyone is on these roads going to wherever they need to go. There's a lot of trucks. It is farmland. There's beautiful vineyards. They're on the way. It's not that far from, and again, I was given permission to give the name. It's Ginger Man Raceway. It's in Michigan, and it's not that far from Lake Michigan. So you get all kinds of people, you know, dragging their boats, etc. So it is pretty noisy, but here's the area of concern. And notice in this spot right here, it's roughly a 10 dB differential. Logarithmic, just like an earthquake, 10 is bad. So what are we going to do? So we the raceway owner says, I like that berm from before, let's go with a berm again. So we looked at it and we proposed 2 areas, and you have to realize that you can't be too close, because even if they go off the raceway and they go up the berm, they can't go up. When they're going full speed ahead, they cannot be going up a steep berm. So we proposed it in this location. Alternate was like looking down in this area right here. And then, of course, it turns out it's a wetland. And the Nature Conservancy goes, whoa, wait a minute, what are you doing to our land? So a lot of conversation, what was going on, what we could do, the plantings. The owner really loved the berm. He was not that fond of doing the barrier. That was a wall, so to speak. It just, in his mind, it was a segue into problems of someone crashing into it. Now, there are people that really like it, so where do we stand on that? Well, this is the important piece that I want to drive. That is the plot I showed before with the noise curves. That's by a computer program that you can purchase and use. So I could do it with my old computer programs and model it myself. You can actually buy programs and you can model it, and it's not that easy. I wouldn't recommend it if someone doesn't know a lot about sound and noise. But what do we do in a scenario where we're trying to get this dynamic going on? And what I want to focus on is that what happened to solve the problem when there was all kinds of conflict. And it was, you have to bring both sides together. So I had the minister talking to the raceway owner. They are now very good friends. And the minister said, you know, here's the real problem. When they're walking in, they see these bikes and these cars whipping around. They know that there's a raceway there. They come inside, and when I say, let's have a moment for prayer, they see the raceway cars. In that moment of prayer, they hear it that much more. Can you just block it some way? So back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And so what was the main solution? It was beautiful. The rate conversation. What time is the service? 11 to 12. Perfect. So early in the morning till 11 o'clock, you could use the raceway or whatever. Between 11 and 12, they basically, so that was the practice runs, getting used to the track. 11 and 12, everyone goes back, they get ready for the race. 12 o'clock on, they're like making all the noise that they want to. Minister was happy. Berm is up, SoundSense berm is up. Residents to the north are happy. The minister was happy, and the only thing that was done was in this area here was they built trees, not for the noise. And that was your adjusting expectation. I was very clear with the minister that there would be no reduction in noise, but there would be a perceived reduction because they saw it less. So everything was fine. One little comment that was made. Well, you know, sometimes in the basement we have Sunday school, and sometimes the people, you know, come early and they drop the kids off, and then I don't know how good it is that they would be hearing the noise before. So I said, why don't you see? It's the congregation. Talk to your congregation. And the thing that needs to be done is I will engineer the windows that will match the noisiest sound that is coming from the raceway, so that if you decide to go ahead, it's going to be in the documents. They can just call up, and I gave them 3 vendors. They could just call up and say, can I get bids or whatever? The raceway owner said he would pay for it. Now, as of now, they have not called the raceway owner, and the raceway owner is saying, if they want to, I will buy them for them. One last caveat, and that was, again, remember, mathematically I can model this, and for the berm, that was successful. But in a situation like this, where we had to go from community back to the noisemaker, which was the raceway, there was one person that was grumbling that was on the board. So the concern was that this grumble would permeate. We were so close to having this done. So I suggested, I had a quick conversation with that person. They had never been on a raceway. They just looked at it and experienced the noise. So, you know, sometimes I'll do designs for, you know, outdoor venues with music or whatever, and I try to make sure they invite the neighbors or whatever it is. In this case, I said to the raceway owner, why don't you take him for a spin in your fastest car? Just take him for a spin. So sure enough, the owner, who has like a barn of Lamborghinis and whatever, picked one of his fastest favorite cars, took the grumbler out for a spin, who wanted to go one more time, and before you know it, he said, you know, considering how much revenue comes into this community, I think it's a good idea that we do as it is proposed. The church is happy. The people to the north are happy. I think this is a good idea. I think we should go forward with it, and then, if necessary, do the windows. So the conclusion was that even though scientifically one area we did a very good job, in the other area we were inhibited by just the natural consequences of life itself, and still came up with a solution. And it was only by getting the two sides to talk to each other, because when one perceives noise, it is the unwanted sound. So to shift their thinking a little bit more to a wanted sound, Because if we go back and we quickly look at the raceway, it was here that even if we were to do anything at all, the community said, do not put any trees or anything there, because there were cars that were parked there. They didn't want to put money into going onto the raceway, but they loved watching the cars spin by. So a bunch of people were here parked, and they would watch it for about 10, 15 minutes, which of course as an acoustician was making it hard on me to try to get my readings as they're like starting their cars, stopping their cars, yelling at, hey, neighbor. So that then being the case, it brought it all together so that the community was happy, there was revenue to the area, and the people that were involved in the raceway, both coming from wherever in the United States they were coming to race, which they do, and oftentimes outside of the United States, it then became a wonderful solution for everyone. Thank you. And are there any questions?
Thank you, Bonnie. I want to go in one of these Lamborghinis.
Yeah, oh yeah, oh you so do.
Any questions from the web?
Yeah, we have one. So these techniques to make the roadway quieter, could they be applicable for normal highways or roads that are loud?
Yes, yes. We oftentimes use it where someone can purchase a less expensive home because it's closer to a major thoroughfare. And so based on code on how high it can be, you know, we'll model it, take it within usually a 20-foot setback and tell them how high it needs to be.
Thank you. And then we have one more from our web listeners. Would you prefer a physical solution to noise or to find a social solution? Which do you enjoy more personally?
Oh, both. Yeah, it's very important. I mean, first of all, remember it's logarithmic. So when it's 10 dB above background, you can make people like say, well, it's okay, but it's still loud. So you want to be able to bring it down at least to the point where they can talk to each other and not have to speak over and above, you know, especially if you think of being like sitting out on your porch and hearing, you know, the noise and then having to speak loudly just so you can talk to each other. So it's both. It really is a handshaking of both. And both are very important also.
Cool. Thank you.
I think we have a question from the room.
Yeah, I loved your point about the farmer on the tractor because my dad would have said the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
But my mom in the house would have been like, no, it's also very loud. So as a kid, because I grew up in an area very similar on a farm, and I would notice the football game at the high school a mile away. We wouldn't hear it during the summer when the corn was high, but once harvest happened, we would hear the football game and the announcer clearly. Like we could, you know, technically watch from the swing set and hear what was going on. Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned 200 feet of trees for a barrier. Do you have an equivalent guess of like how much corn you need as a barrier? Since we're talking farmland.
Yeah. So, yeah, if it's not high enough, it's just not going to happen. And actually, it serves almost more as a reflector. So you have, you know, here's the ground, but here's the corn, and then, you know, here's the sky. So it's kind of doing this, much like whales when they're positioning themselves in the ocean to send sound.
Okay. Thank you, Bonnie. I'm sure neighbors and racetracks are going to be going around and around on this. Okay, bad pun.
Thank you.
Let's take a pit stop and we'll be right back.